Have you ever gone to a game and there's lots of people there and you want to see what's going on, but because you're physically challenged of your height, you can't see what's happening, know what's going on. Have you ever experienced that? Yes, well, me too. And so sometimes it presents a challenge and you look for a vantage point. I can remember when I was a lot younger, perhaps like, okay, I wouldn't say how long ago, but Barbados was under the rulership of England, and the Queen would come to visit. And when the Queen would come, you know, usually that big furrow and everybody wanted to see. And at times, you know, we were small and we had these flags and stuff like that, and we would try to, you know, be like looking through the legs of someone to see if we could catch a glimpse of her. She would be in that nice vehicle, and so, you know, everybody's looking, and it was difficult to see. And for some of us, my father was a 6'3" or so person, so he would put me on his shoulder, and guess what? I'd be perhaps be 7 feet, so I could actually see. And some of you might have experienced that as well. As Jesus was entering into Jericho, it was like a street parade. And we know the story of Zacchaeus. We are told that he is the chief tax collector. Last week we dealt with that, tax collectors. So we know for a fact that the people of the day did not like tax collectors. I don't think that today anybody still like tax collectors. Unless you're going to be getting back. Oh, somebody said they like a tax collector. Unless you're going to be getting back a check, right? So this tax collector, Zacchaeus, short in stature, heard about Jesus, perhaps from other tax collectors. You never know if you heard about from one last week, and he wanted to see him because, you know, in Palestine, everything was basically set. It isn't like if we had 10 different roads. You had very few roads to park to go to a particular destination. So you had to pass through a particular area. And he knew that Jesus was going to be passing that area in Jericho. Remember, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. And he said, well, how am I going to get to see him? So he saw a sycamore tree and said, Jesus passes that way, so I'm going to go up there. And we know the story. The story tells us that, yes, he went up climbed the sycamore tree, and he saw Jesus. At times in our lives, we have to get to a higher place to see, not necessarily over the crowds, but perhaps in our own spiritual development to see where we are. And sometimes we have to climb that sycamore tree so that Jesus can see us. Not only that we can see Jesus, but that Jesus can know and say to us, come down. And sure enough, as planned, Zacchaeus climbed the tree. Jesus passed, saw him, and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down. He did not just say, come down. He said, come down, for I am going to your house to eat. He didn't say, I'm coming to your house just to lime or play dominoes. I'm coming to your house to eat. And to eat meant a whole lot. This week I was discussing the sermon with someone else, and In Barbados, we have a term that says, ever so welcome, wait for a call, meaning that people tell you, yeah, you are welcome to my house, but they never invite you. Jesus was different, and Jesus said, I am inviting myself to your house. Now, Zacchaeus, as a tax collector, was smart. He was sharp. He was able to think quickly on his feet. And he said, you know what? If, and remember, listen carefully. He said, if I had defrauded anyone, I will repay it. So he's clearing himself in more than one way. If, I remember, the people they did not like the tax collectors. They were the pawns of the Roman authorities. What happens here is very interesting. Not only is Zacchaeus, the tax collector, a sinner, happy to welcome Jesus into his house, but there's a spiritual audit that is going on here. And before he can even spontaneously deal with it, he says, I will pay back. Zacchaeus did not claim a tree for just claiming a tree's sake. This is a sort of spiritual awakening that might drive one, as there's a particular author who says that, talks about the insane characters of Jesus' day. But within the space of a few sentences, we witness the transformation of Zacchaeus. And Jesus declares his salvation. Climbing that sycamore tree to see Jesus may indeed have been a form of spiritual striving. Here we see the evidence of an authentic encounter which suddenly quickens Zacchaeus' heart. Happiness, along with reparation, seem to flow effortlessly in his response. Although the crowds were not pleased with Jesus' choice of a new friend, Zacchaeus was one of the most despised men of Jericho. Nonetheless, they had to respect him. Yes, Zacchaeus knew that he was perhaps a thief, a con man. But he was untouchable because he was protected by the Roman government. And so in the minds of the crowd, this was a poor choice by Jesus. And as Jesus would have entered Zacchaeus' house, I'm sure that the crowds were still outside waiting for Jesus to come out. And as an artist past, I could picture in my mind Jesus coming out with his hand around Zacchaeus' shoulder, quieting the crowd, and saying to them, today salvation has come to Zacchaeus' house. He has become a true son of Abraham. And here it is, Jesus saying, I have come to seek and save the lost. Zacchaeus, who was lost, is now found. Now here ends one of the more beautiful stories in the Bible about a short little man who climbed a sycamore tree in order to see Jesus. A story about a man who was transformed from greedy to generous, from selfish to selfless, from a heaving heart to a thanksgiving heart. And so we ask ourselves, what did Jesus say to him in the house? If only we knew what Jesus said, then perhaps we could say similar things to each other. And we too can be changed and become equally generous. Now, how do we apply this story to our lives? Perhaps we can talk about the fact that about the stories earlier in the Gospels of Luke, we heard about the rich young ruler who wanted to be saved. And Jesus invited him to sell everything and give to the poor. And the young man found difficulty in doing that. And now, some stories later, we hear about Zacchaeus, who goes through the eye of a needle and is saved. We could perhaps focus on that, but let's move on. Perhaps we could talk about the fact that Zacchaeus was the biggest immoral scoundrel in town, a reprobate, the worst of all sinners, and Jesus ate a meal with him in his house. We could perhaps talk about the fact that Jesus will eat with anyone, no matter how bad a person may be. And so it is with Jesus' meal, the Holy Communion. If you are the biggest sinner in town, Jesus wants you at his table. If you believe that you are the worst of the worst, Jesus wants to share his meal of forgiveness with you. This may touch you because a friend or a family member never felt worthy enough to come to church with you and to share at Jesus' table. They don't even want to put their foot into the church door. So now we have a calling. And I wonder if we are hearing Jesus this morning. Are we hearing Jesus saying to us, come down from where you are in life. I want to eat with you. Are we hearing that? Or are we like the people around who are upset with Jesus for inviting the outcast, those marginalized in the community, like Zacchaeus, to come and share a meal with them? Today, are we helping the Zacchaeuses of our lives to come down and to eat with us, to eat with Jesus? Because that is our role. It is what we are called to do. If we do not invite others to come down, what do you think will become of us? And all we are called to do is to invite, and Jesus will ignite. We are called to facilitate, and Jesus would do the increasing. I really don't know what you have, perhaps if you have worked it out or not, what Jesus said to Zacchaeus in the house. Whatever you could conjure up, what Jesus said to Zacchaeus that made him a changed person. Perhaps we are called to say that to someone else. Help them to come down and to be part of the community. Zacchaeus, as he came down, a man who was once on the fringes of society, was now part of that society. When we invite others to be part of, even though they might have been estranged from the community, and we invite them in, they once again become part of that community. And they share in the table of inclusion. And so, whatever your stature may be, whether you are 6 feet or 4 feet, Jesus invites us to come down, to eat a meal with him. Today, Jesus may stop directly under your sycamore tree to invite you down. And I trust that we will hear Jesus saying to our hearts, "Come down, for I am having lunch with you today."